Hello there, it's Austin. Today we're gonna make a Hazy IPA. I mean, I'm not really making it today, I made it a couple weeks ago, but today we're gonna talk about it. So let's get started. This recipe starts out like most recipes by gathering our water. I'll be collecting right about 4.8 gallons of reverse osmosis. For the water additions, I'll be using a relatively high gypsum to calcium chloride ratio, really trying to emphasize the bitterness coming from our hops. For the base fermentables, we'll start with a 70% charge of Pilsner malt. On top of that, I'll be adding a small 6% charge of Carapils. This will help with the body and mouth feel, the texture of the beer, as well as hopefully the head retention, although I usually don't seem to have too much luck with retaining that anyways. With both of our malts milled up and then added to the mash, it's time for our final fermentable addition, which will be just under 24% of flaked oats. The flaked oats will contribute a little bit of body and creaminess, but also a little bit of haze and cloudiness, which is important in a hazy IPA. With all the fermentables added to my foundry, it's time to let it sit for about an hour at 150 degrees. At the magical and probably not too important time limit of 60 minutes, we'll pull our grains out and then let all the wort drain back into the kettle. Even though we're not worried about clearing up the wort too much, I will pull some out and rinse it back through the grains. After we're satisfied that our wort is nice and efficient, it's time to start and maintain the boil for our favorite arbitrary time limit of 60 minutes. Oh, and don't forget to drop in some foam inhibitor during the heat up process, unless you're really into mopping. I'll be using mosaic hops for the boil and dry hop edition of this beer. Since this is a hazy, I'm really going for fruity, and mosaic hits the nail on the head with tropical fruit, citrus, and I feel like I can get blueberries sometimes. Once we've finished up the boil and cooled down the wort to our yeast pitch temperature of around 70 degrees, we'll take a quick gravity check, and then it's time to pitch the yeast. I'm using Imperial's A04 Barbarian, pitched into a 5-gallon Torpedo keg that I'll be using as a fermenter. For the first couple days of fermentation, I'll run a blow-off tube into a ball lock disconnect connected to the in port on the keg, and then when it's time to dry hop, I'll do so with 3 ounces of mosaic hops. Using my stainless steel filter hop cartridge thing, I'll go ahead and drop it into the keg at the 2-day mark, doing this fairly early in the fermentation process just to clean up any oxygen that sneaks in there during the transfer. Right after finishing up the dry hopping process, I'll go ahead and put on my spunding valve, set it to between 12 and 14 psi, and then let the rest of the fermentation play out for maybe a total of 12 days at around room temperature. Important note, I probably would not dry hop again while using a floating dip tube in my spunding keg. As you can see here, I kind of got unlucky and had my tube get hung up on the dry hopping canister. So in the future, would probably just use a trimmed dip tube if I wanted to spund an IPA. After we've done the hard work of waiting for the beer to finish up for 10 to 12 days, I'll drop it in the keezer to cold crash, and then it's time to transfer over to our serving keg. Since our beer is already carbonated and cooled, and we don't mind it being a little hazy, it's time to pour and enjoy. I have an interesting relationship with hazy IPAs. I actually really like most fruited ales, sours, wheats, even blondes that have fruit additions. But for some reason, the beer that gives the most fruit character despite not using any fruit, I am just not the biggest fan of. Nevertheless, on the sine wave of my enjoyment of IPAs, I feel like I'm kind of coming up on the peak of hazies right now. This beer has an immediate citrus, almost grapefruit taste to it. The aftertaste blends into more of a traditional hop flavor, ending with an almost kind of piney taste at the end. On the nose, there's more of that citrus fruit with a little bit of fresh box of blueberries, almost. I've let this beer condition for a while, and it's maintained a pretty hazy appearance, which is good. I actually put some biofine in it just to kind of see if I could get it to clear up, and it didn't really, so I always appreciate when a hazy is hazy because of its ingredient mixture and not just because it's fresh or somebody flipped the keg over a couple times. I feel like most of the beers I make are within the 5 to 6% ABV range, and this one lands right in that range, but I appreciate that it's not super boozy because it makes it easier to drink when it's hot outside. The more that I reflect on it, the more I feel like my taste in beer relates directly to the outside temperature. Maybe I should just invest in some ice packs or something instead of brewing so much. Anyways, this beer would fit right in the hazy craze of 6 or 7 years ago, which is fun and tasty, so cheers!